Hi, everybody. Welcome back. This is part 2 of the World War I presentation, and in this section, we'll focus primarily on inventions and technology used during World War I. And as British Admiral Jackie Fisher said in 1915, the war is going to be won by inventions. So all of those great inventions that were created during the Industrial Revolution will have an opportunity to showcase their powers during this global conflict. World War I is a multi-front war, and what that means is that you have fighting going on in two different sections, two different areas primarily. First of all, in the center here, you have Germany and Austria-Hungary, which are the Central Powers. They are the enemies of the Allies, and the Allies at this time are made up of France and Russia and Great Britain. And Germany is sandwiched right between them, and so they perceive their biggest threat as being from Russia. And they have to, what they didn't want, what Germany didn't want, was to have a two-front war, a multi-front war, because that divides up their forces. So if they could get rid of the lesser problem, which they perceived as France, they could then direct all their energy toward the big problem, which was Russia. And a plan was devised. Actually, this plan called the Schlieffen Plan was devised already in the late 1800s. Germany always felt that they at some point would be at war with Russia. And so they had already devised a plan that by the time it was used in World War I, it was probably already 30 years old. And the Schlieffen Plan said that Germany was going to, if they find themselves in a world war, that they would knock out France first, and they would do that by marching through Belgium and coming up around France's, coming up from behind, so to speak, and attacking France from where they would likely be located, which is right here and is called the Western Front. The problem was that dragging all the munitions and the artillery and everything through Belgium became problematic. The wagons that were being used to pull munitions, anti-aircraft artillery and all that kind of stuff, got bogged down in mud. Instead of it being a very quick trip through Belgium to kind of sneak up on France on the Western Front, it no longer ended up being a surprise. And so France had time to prepare for this, what would have been a sneak kind of come from behind strike on France. And so what they wanted to avoid, which was a multi-front war fighting France to the west and Russia to the east, ended up not is exactly what happened. They ended up creating this two-front war. And the worst of it for them early on was the Western Front in their war with France. This war became a war of attrition, and essentially that means it's a total war. Everything is on the table. Everything is fair game for destruction, whether it's civilian homes or cities, whatever. Kind of like what we saw in the Civil War with Sherman's march through the South. You destroy everything, the communication, the transportation, you starve people out, you do whatever it takes to get your enemy to surrender. And certainly this war was no different than that which we saw in the Civil War. So these are pictures, these are real photographs from the Western Front. The Western Front was characterized by trench warfare, and that's where very deep trenches are built into the Earth's surface along the front, along the line. And for all practical purposes, the troops live in these trenches, and they build dugouts and everything else, and everything they do is for where they live and where they spend their time is kind of below the surface, so to speak. And so the Western Front, over years of about 3 years of fighting this way with France in this trench warfare, no side, either Germany or France, is able to deliver a decisive blow because the men are living in the trenches, and so they're not really getting anywhere. It's becomes a stalemate, and they kind of stay in the same position for, like I said, just about 3 years. And one reason why they are in this position, this stalemate, is because of technology. The machine gun had been started to be used in this war with great success. And the problem was that anytime soldiers tried to go up over the top of these trenches and advance on the enemy, they would be mowed down by machine guns. And so it prevented soldiers from going over the top. And so nobody was winning anything. They just kind of, they would take pot shots at each other and things like that over time. But for the most part, life in the trenches was pretty bad, actually. Americans at this time are not in this war. America's neutral. President Wilson declares the United States neutral during World War I. But in reality, he's actually building up America's military, which needs to be built up. Were it not for Teddy Roosevelt building up our Navy while he was president, we wouldn't have much of a military at all. And so Wilson takes time to build up America's military and do what it can in the event that the United States does enter World War I. So trench warfare, you have an area between the two forces that are fighting against one another called no man's land. And it's filled with barbed wire, snipers, mines. Anytime somebody tries to go up over the top to try to make some sort of advance on the enemy, there's barbed wire there that could trip them up, snipers that could knock them out if they tried to pop their head up over the trench. Mines in the ground that you step on and could blow you and whoever else up that you're with. And so no man's land really becomes just a nightmare of a place just to have to endure during this time period. The trenches were incredibly filthy. They're filled with vermin. You've got bad weather that would, cause a lot of rain and flooding of these trenches, and the men really have nowhere to go other than to stay right there in the trenches. Sanitation was bad, so they're also going, to the bathroom in the trenches. You've got snipers that, again, if you try to pop your head up over the trenches, somebody is from the enemy side is always there waiting for that helmet to appear over the edge of the trench that they can shoot at. And so it was just a horrible place, nightmarish place to have to exist. The worst thing soldiers in the trenches could hear really from their commanders was to tell them to go over the top, because going over the top, the orders to go over the top and advance on the enemy almost meant certain death. There were very few that were going to get through no man's land without being killed by enemy, sniper fire, machine guns, landmines, get tripped up in barbed wire where you're just sitting ducks. So it was really absolutely just a horrendous experience. If you died in the trenches, it's not like you could really be buried. They simply just walked over you, or they would put boards on top of you, and you became part of the path, so to speak, that others were walking on. It was, of course, filth, rats, lice, everything else you can imagine were part of the trenches. I'm not going to go over these pictures too in depth. You can always pause the video to read this yourself. But lice was horrible, body lice was horrible, and lice carried fevers, trench fever, and so soldiers were getting sick. You also had rats that that didn't care if you were dead or alive. Rats would try to eat you. They were paid no attention to whether or not you were living. They would try to eat on you. Men would wake up with rats eating on them. They multiplied rapidly in the trenches, so rats were just in the thousands. And not only that, but trench rot. From living in the trenches that could be filled with muddy water and so forth. Their feet started to rot. It was just absolutely a nightmare. That's a gruesome picture, but it's real. Pictures of rats, of course. And then it really just became sport killing rats. Sometimes they became food if you had nothing else. These are aerial pictures of trenches. And even to this day, even though these trenches have been filled in with dirt and grass seed put over them, the trenches were so deep and left such deep scars in the earth that you can still see kind of those scars from aerial photography or from satellite images. And of course, these are from one of the newer technologies. Bombs that are being dropped from planes or artillery that is shooting bombs into the no man's land area, and of course it creates all these little holes or pockets that also fill up with water. War is definitely bad. The atrocities, the the injuries that men faced and suffered during this time was just absolutely astounding. New deadly weapons with using old tactics produced a tremendous amount of loss of life. We now have airplanes, so you have dogfight wars between World War I, between fighter pilots that are fighting one another in the air above those that are fighting on the ground. You have the introduction of tanks for the first time, which ultimately will help bring an end to the stalemate because the tanks can roll right over these trenches, and wherever a machine gun fire is happening, they can roll right over it, and so the tank is going to be essential in breaking the stalemate and advancing the fighting in the west on the Western Front further than what it was before, a stalemate that was caused by another piece of technology, which was the machine gun. Poisonous gas is used. Other weapons that are used are flamethrowers that essentially just spray fire on the enemy, whether they're in a dugout or a pit or something. Grenade launchers. This is a sunken British tank in during World War I. And as I said earlier, tanks will help to break the stalemate by being able to go right over those trenches. Doesn't matter if they're being shot at with machine gun fire, they'll just go right through it. More pictures of tanks, World War I tanks. Finally, during the Christmas holiday, both the French and the Germans would take the holiday off. They would meet. They would come out of their trenches, meet in the middle, sing songs and Christmas songs, tell stories, drink some alcohol, swap food, and enjoy the holiday, knowing that once the holiday was over with, they would return to their trenches and begin fighting and killing one another all over again. And if you Google Christmas truce, you'll find some videos on that as well. All right, so this ends World War I in the causes of World War I in Europe, and tomorrow we'll be looking at the U.S. entry into World War I, what eventually brings us into the war.